Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will make his second visit to Southeast Asia in less than a week as he tries to shore up fuel supplies. The Prime Minister says he will travel to Malaysia and Brunei following last week's visit to Singapore. That's with the US naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz threatening fresh disruptions to energy supply chains. Our next guest says regional partners need to work together on longer-term issues. Joining us now is Bec Strating, who's the director of the Trobe Centre for Global Security. So we are seeing this scrambling to try and reinforce some of these regional alliances. Is this preparedness that perhaps should have taken place in the wake of the pandemic? And is it sort of a sense of an emergency sentiment doing that now?
Yeah, I think that is a fair assessment. There were lessons from the pandemic that may have not been learnt as quickly as they may have, particularly when it comes to issues of fuel stockpiles. So what we're dealing with now is a sense of crisis, but certainly before what's going on in the Middle East, experts have been talking about maritime dependencies and vulnerabilities, including in issues like fuel and energy and food security. Australia, as a maritime trading nation, depends significantly on open sea lines of communication and open trading routes. So some of this was foreseeable. And sometimes when it comes to these complex and interconnected security issues, there's a tendency to kind of kick the can down the road. But hopefully this crisis at the moment will allow the Australian government and other experts and leaders to think more carefully about the future and about just how complex and uncertain our future is.
And so much of that uncertainty, of course, comes down to the Trump administration and President Trump himself being notoriously volatile, right, and unpredictable. To that end, how does Australia continue to balance that traditional alliance with the US whilst having to protect its own national interests? Just looking at what could happen to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the sort of outcomes could potentially be tolls, either from the Iranian side or the US side or both. The president's floated a joint venture concept there as well. So how much power is Australia and its regional allies going to have in terms of that freedom of navigation in maritime trade?
These are absolutely crucial questions. And I think there's another question here about whether the second Trump administration is really going to compel security thinkers and leaders in Australia to reassess its security settings. So at the moment, what we're seeing is Australia take a kind of alliance plus diversification approach to foreign policy. So we continue to rely on the US alliance, particularly when it comes to our defence capabilities. And that means that Australia is not in a position to simply toss out the US alliance. But certainly the Trump administration is making some of the choices more difficult for Australia. And it can't just rely on the assumptions that it has held about the United States and the state of the United States as an international actor. And so we see the current Albanese government really looking to diversify relationships, focusing a lot on Asia and the Pacific. This is, one of the striking elements of these trips to Asia is the importance of Australia's trading relationships with the region for its security. But there are also these longer-term issues of how Australia really relates with other non-great powers, whether they're in Asia or outside of Asia, in order to shore up some of the most critical laws, international laws for Australian security. And the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is of critical importance for economics and for security. And so just overnight, we saw that ASEAN leaders released a statement around just exactly this issue, the importance of maintaining open and safe transit passage.
We actually had Defense Minister Marles here in Tokyo recently promising to deepen cooperation with Tokyo. What country or countries are the best hedge for Australia when it comes to ideological and trade principles?
Yeah, that's another really important question for Australia, because as a middle-sized country, we can't do everything and we do have to prioritise, and hard decisions have to be made. So I would say that Australia, even before this crisis and before the second Trump administration, had been looking to strengthen and deepen relationships with countries in the region. And Japan is a really good example of that. Through the Reciprocal Access Agreement of 2023, as an example, Australia and Japan have been getting closer, and these two countries are both allies of the United States and share a common interest in having a stable rules-based order, as leaders like to call it, that can, help with security and prosperity. So Japan has been very important. We also see an uplift in engagement with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, again, of significant importance for Australia. We just need to look at Australia's geography to understand the importance of having positive relationships with our Southeast Asian nations. We also see increased interest in deepening and developing relations with Korea and also India in the region. But now I think we are also seeing an increased interest in increasing relationships with countries outside of Asia. So Canada and Europe. So the Canadian Prime Minister was recently in Australia talking about this rupture to the global rules-based order and imploring non-great powers to work together more closely. And I think it's an important message in the sense that middle powers have agency and they should use it for their own interests.